directory.
Slippery where our logo's at.
Okay, let's get this thing on. Let's get this thing going. All ready? Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. We're here for the regular meeting of the Finance and Facilities Committee of the School District of Waukesha. We have to go through general business. Basically, has the meeting been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Okay, item number 1's passed. Citizens to speak, and I don't see any citizens here tonight. So we're going to run right into the committee issues and discussion items. The first one is presentation of the preliminary budget. Darren?
Yeah, in your packet is the new packet and new format for the budget for this coming year. And you've all been through this process, so you all know that this is all based on a set of assumptions at this point. We don't know what our third Friday pupil count is. We don't know what our equalized assessed valuation is going to be. We don't know what our state aid is going to be. So Joe and I have been looking at trend data and that type of information to come up with some, what we think, reasonable assumptions for this point. In the executive summary on the cover page, I went through 3 or 4 items that I thought were more critical. Not that everything isn't critical, but some things are different than what you've seen in the past, or a different approach to how we're going to go about doing things in the future. The first of those is the long-term debt, and I have that as an informational item at the end of the agenda as well to talk specifically about that refinancing. That is reflected in our budget, the preliminary budget as it stands now, $1,150,000 extra payment on that Fund 38 payment or debt schedule. So our Fund 10 budget is actually $1,150,000 in the hole. We'd be using fund balance to make that payment. But we're not obligated, even if we budget for it, if things financially aren't looking as promising as we want for the 16-17 school year, or then we can hold off on that payment. We can go earlier. The costing that I've provided information on, Joe and I assume that the extra payment will be made in January after we get our first property tax receipts. So it wouldn't be a cash flow issue for us. So with that said, what that would do is pay off our obligation a year earlier, save us an estimated $160,000 in interest, and provide us budget flexibility in the 2019-20 school year. If you remember our budget forecast, our revenue limit more than likely is going to continue to retract and take away your authority as a board. So that would provide us $1 million worth of flexibility in that fiscal year. Again, even with the budget being adopted, we are not mandated to make that extra payment. Again, if we don't think the benefit's going to outweigh the cost, then we just hold off a year. The maintenance levy, Fund 41, that's kind of Glenn's maintenance. It gets segregated out for state aid purposes. And if you're a negatively aided district, your shared cost or what you spend every year, you lose. I think we're in the upper teens for negative aid on a percentage basis. The more you can run through Fund 41, the more they spread out those expenditures on an average basis. So it actually helps you for state aid purposes. So Joe and I spent some time, and we identified there's $747,000 that are currently coded to Fund 10 that will recode to Fund 41, again for the state aid benefit. There's no new money here. We're just it's strictly an accounting function. One thing we are proposing to do in Fund 41 is to create a $370,000, at least that's the number we have in there right now, curriculum maintenance project fund. A lot of what Glenn does is the nuts and bolts, the HVAC, roofs, doors, windows, those types of projects, and we really don't have a way right now of funding curriculum-based, making, any of the new initiatives we have with flexible space and glass walls and all the things that are in vogue right now. This would designate a separate account for that, because one of the things we struggle with in the maintenance area is Glenn has his kind of nuts and bolts list of maintenance projects, and then during the school year we add curriculum-based projects that pushes Glenn's maintenance things down. We've already told the principal we're doing that, and it just creates some confusion. So this would allow Jody and her office to be involved in the planning and scheduling of those maintenance projects. Where are we heading curriculum-wise? The preliminary tax rate, yeah, sure.
You mentioned that Glenn's projects get pushed down, or those projects gets pushed out. Does that mean we're gonna farm that work out? Because Glenn only has so many people to do those projects.
Yeah, I
correct?
think-
So if you have a fund for it, it doesn't mean that you're gonna be able to get those, you farm it out.
Yeah, I think what we do is we end up farming out more of it. We're not increasing his staffing at all.
Right, okay. Just wanna make sure.
And the other thing I'm hoping these two planning processes running next to each other, that there's some synergy, some efficiencies. We're not putting a wall up and then next year putting a glass wall where the wall was just put, there'd be some more even flow to our strategy with all of this. Any other questions on that?
Just going back to the beginning, why do we have the deficit that we do?
The Fund 38 debt, that's tied to the Stiefel Nicholas investment. Back 8 years ago, we issued bonds to make the necessary payments. We think, there's the legal process at work, that there's a settlement out there that will recoup these funds. Actually, this, I guess, past year now, we're still working in 2 fiscal years, so if I say the wrong year, bear with me. The board didn't budget at all for that principal and interest payment of $1 million, and you remember in January or February, that was one of the budget amendments, was to essentially say, let's use fund balance to make that payment. But at some point, if everything works out in the legal process, we will be reimbursed for all of those principal and interest payments. We just have no idea when that'll be. So that's why I referenced in the last sentence, this is tied to a potential legal settlement. I don't know when, I don't know how much. We think.
That may or may not happen.
Yeah.
If it does, some of you will
So the budget that we have, or you have in front of you, budgets for the scheduled principal and interest payment, and then an additional principal and interest payment to pay down the debt quicker, saving us about $160,000, depending on when we make the payment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, just real quickly, that's a higher interest rate than what we're normally paying right now whenever we do our short-term borrow. So at the time, because our credit rating was not very good, it was a good place to go for money, and the rate wasn't very high. But as interest rates have come down, and we have been building up this surplus, it's a good time to start thinking about paying down that debt, even though we don't have to, but it's just costing us money.
Yeah. The current, we'll go over it, I guess, under the information item. The current interest rate on that debt's 4.25%, and we're maybe getting 0.4% on our interest returns right now. So that spread or margins, I think, driving us to make this decision. The tax rate, I know this is a number out of all the numbers in a $180 million budget. This is one that gets a lot of attention. But there's some assumptions, as I mentioned early on, that we're making in relation to that. One of the assumption is that we'll see a 2.77% drop in equalization aid from last year. And you've all been on the board a long time. Hopefully you all know, you get a revenue limit of X amount, and then it's divided between aid and levy. And if aid goes up, levy goes down. And if aid goes down, the levy goes up and the rate goes with it. So we like to think we have a pretty conservative aid estimate in here, which would allow that rate to come down come fall. But aid is by far the hardest number to project of all the numbers in that document, because there's so many variables. Even in a second year of state biennial budget, it's not only dependent on what you spend as a district, but it's also dependent on what all the other districts in the state spend and what they're doing with their shared costs. So again, we think we have hopefully a pretty conservative estimate for aid. We also do not know our third Friday pupil count, which will tell us how much the revenue limit is. So all those things are looming out there. So we've made some assumptions with the aid and some assumptions with enrollment. I think we're, was it 91 kids down, Joe? 91 resident kids down for our third Friday count. And with all that said, we're looking at basically a 1 cent raise in the tax rate. But again, I'm hoping to come back with a clearer picture, a more palatable picture, even though this is pretty stable. But one other thing I wanted to point out, and I put it in the executive summary, one of the reasons we have this stable tax environment right now with aid going down is our revenue limit authority is shrinking by $1.2 million from last year to this year. So this board's ability to tax is reduced by that amount. So we didn't get to what we're talking about in terms of rate by shrewd fiscal management or anything like that. It's just less authority for you as a school board. And then the budget document itself, I'll walk you through. I just wanted to hit these 3 or 4 things. I'll walk you through the new format, which I think is easier to use for the public than what we've seen in the past. It's still a work in process. Joe and I want to add some things to the final. We just kind of ran out of time for this meeting. So if going to the booklet, one other thing, this tax scenario sheet, I had showed it to you last month with different aid scenarios. And now what we'll do is I've put what this preliminary budget has in the tax levy. If you remember how the information will flow, come October, I'll know our equalized assessed valuation at least. We'll know the third Friday count. That'll go in the middle. And then the final, which you'll approve at the end of October, we'll put over here. So we'll be able to see in one sheet how we've transitioned, how good our assumptions were.
Nice.
One of the things that we'll know that before the final approval that we won't know, if you recall, for our regular October meeting is the voucher program participation. If you remember, we adopted a rate and we came back literally a few days later last year and had to do a new rate, and then we did the final rate. So this will kind of, remind us that it's going to be, not complete smooth sailing. It used to be, once you got that aid number, you knew what it was on October 15th. I could tell you what the tax rate was going to be. The information's, even though we're working with DPI to get that voucher information earlier, there's no promises on that. So that's the purpose of, I just wanted to show you, this is a sheet you'll be seeing more and more as we continue into fall. The budget document itself, a lot of similar things, but kind of a different layout that I think will be good for you and the community to reference things quickly, and for me as I'm trying to answer your questions. But I'll walk you through. I'm on page 1, what I call budget highlights or the key assumptions. Resident enrollment, as I mentioned, we're looking at a decline of 91 ADM. ADM is average daily membership or a full-time student. The revenue limits, if you recall, since January, I've been probably pretty repetitive, but our dependency on those exemptions within the revenue limit, both declining enrollment and the hold harmless, is 2.5 million. Those are one-time, non-recurring exemptions. So they help you as your enrollment's coming down to soften the financial impact. But eventually our enrollment's going to come back. I mean, that's just historically what has happened. They also slow you down. And the odd thing with the revenue limit, if we only lose 50 kids, so meaning we have more kids, we'll actually have less revenue limit authority this year because of those exemptions. So it's an interesting, it's kind of the exact opposite of everything you've taught about more kids, more money kind of. When you're in those exemptions, that's why I talk about them so much, it holds you back as you start to climb out of declining enrollment. The voucher program, a tough one to predict, and I think it always will be because we don't know who the kids are. DPI keeps all that information, we just get a number. But we're budgeting 104 of our students. Last year we had 69, I think. So we're assuming that as that program becomes more known and how it works in the public, that there'll be some growth. After this year, there's a cap at 1% of your resident enrollment can participate. And over the next 10 years, that'll grow by 1% until the 10th year. Then there is no caps any longer on the voucher program.
Okay, Joe.
I know this is new, relatively new. Is there any way that we can validate that number from DPI is the correct one? I mean, they give us a number, but how can we validate it?
We get no information to even be able to, we don't know the
We
kids.
just have to accept whatever they give us.
Exactly,
Wow.
yeah.
I don't like that.
It,
You'd have to wonder why they'd give you a false number, Joe.
yeah. But it is odd, I mean, as a public, but that's the way it is, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna sit here and,
I get it. I understand, but
so.
doesn't mean I have to like it.
So I guess the main point I want to make here is our total exposure to the voucher program is 130 students. We're only budgeting 104. We kind of took last year's percentage, assumed some level of growth, but we are not budgeting our full exposure to the voucher program because we just don't think it'll get that popular that fast, and we could be completely wrong on that. So if those numbers come true, 104 students, we would see $1 million, just over $1 million in revenue limit authority increase, and a new expenditure of $814,000. If you remember, we had that last year too, where it actually generates more revenue than the expense. But I think people see that as a moneymaker for the district, but I think this is the wrong comparison to be making. The comparison I'd like to make, and I'll never be able to make because I don't know who the kids are, is what if those kids would have come to our schools as opposed to being a voucher student? And I could count them, both for aid and revenue, and we'll never be able to do that because we don't know who they are. So, and never know what their choice might have been. So, interesting program, interesting way of financing it. Open enrollment's the next topic. I think last month and a couple months prior to that, we talked about our trend with open enrollment. This number is probably a little more conservative than it needs to be, but we're going off of applications, and with open enrollment, you don't know until the kids show up whether there's no obligation for them to. They can always revert back to their resident schools. So we're projecting right now a 13% decrease, and really what you budget is the spread, the number of kids coming in minus the kids leaving. That's the net effect of those budget line items. So that's what we're using right now. We're budgeting a small growth in property valuation. Again, on the tax rate conversation, we're hoping that growth in EAV is a little better than what we have budgeted now come fall. You'll see a drop in Fund 10 expenditures. A lot of that has to do with the transfer of expenditures into Fund 41. The expenditures are still there, they're just being reclassified. So that's and the same on the revenue side, that levy that used to go to 10 is now going to Fund 41, again, for aid purposes and to lessen the burden on our local property tax payers. The levy, we have it, tax levy increase of 0.23% as of now. The aid we've talked about, we're projecting right now a decrease of 2.77%. Employee benefits, the major change there is the budget does reflect the change of all staff to the high deductible health plan in the HSA format, which will take effect September 1. WRS, our rate adjustment, it's mid-budget year for us, but January 1, that adjustment is reflected in the budget. The long-term debt, as I mentioned, the extra payment for that Fund 38 debt, and I think the keynote there, now it's something maybe we'll bold and underline, is it's no accident, there's no Fund 39, there is no Fund 39 referendum-approved debt for the Waukesha School District. And for a district our size, I think that's something we should advertise repeatedly. The next page is the summary of all the funds, just a simple, what's the total receipts in those funds, what's the total expenditures in those funds, but the thing that this page also adds is what are the fund balances in those funds, both now the 07, 01, 16 beginning fund balance is really last year's audited fund balance, and once we get this year's audit done, we'll put in the current audited numbers, but it shows you where we are in all these funds, because I know a lot of times I get questions from board members, and it's easy to forget. This is a quick reference of, how much do we have in Fund 47 or whatever the number is we're talking about. It'll be a quick reference, hopefully, for you and I. The next few pages, I won't spend a whole lot of time on because this is DPI's recommended budget adoption format. If you know our account code structure, you can sort data a lot of different ways. They do it by major function area, meaning if you flip to page 5, the expense side, 110,000 is undifferentiated curriculum. That's elementary level. And that's just how DPI suggests we adopt it. But if you go to page 9, you'll see I always lead with the tax levy summary. You'll see the 0.23% increase, the 0.16% increase in the rate. And then we get into what I think you're accustomed to seeing, the source and object summaries that I think is more what the public looks for. The descriptors are able to be more specific on what the object numbers are. So in the far right, you'll see yellow boxes. And what Joe and I do here is, every one of these line items has a story behind it, but we try to hit the more impactful assumptions. And if you look at the top of page 10, that yellow box, it says Fund 41 levy increase of, that's that transfer I'm talking about in the recoding. So I just walk down, middle of the page is the open enrollment assumption. The per pupil aid is going up $150. It is flat under current legislation here on out. So that's softening the loss of revenue limit authority. The assumption for aid. And the nice thing about this is it allows you to go back to the document and you know what you were thinking at the time, right or wrong. So the next few pages are the expenditures. Again, a lot of the yellow boxes are tied to that reclassification of Fund 41 expenditures. On page 12, though, that's the transfer into Fund 38 to make that additional debt payment. So we footnoted that. And then you get into all of our other funds. Fund 21's donations. I know our donations real well yet, but my previous district, Walmart would give something to a school to run a special program. You run those types of things through Fund 21, and you can see the activity that we're getting from community support. $112,000 is what we're budgeting. Fund 27 is your special education fund. Anything related to special education is required by DPI to be tracked here. But the expenditures tend to move with your Fund 10 expenditures. It's the same teaching salary scale. It's the same health plan. It's the same. So the trend on these generally is, somewhat linear. Not that there can't be some variations. And Fund 27 rolls into page 15. Fund 38, we've talked a lot about that. That does reflect the additional debt payment again. And we'll also bold that we have no Fund 39 debt.
Quick question on that additional debt payment. When would we actually make that payment? When could we make that payment? If we decide to.
You can make it, well, you have to give 30 days notice to the state trust fund, so you can't do it. I guess the soonest we could do it would be September 9th. But we need to make sure cash flow wise, that's my main, I'd like to make it as soon as possible once I know it's not a cash flow issue.
That's why I'm asking is that, we have the cash flow chart.
Yep.
That we really don't want to go under zero.
No, that's frowned upon you generally.
Yeah, we try to avoid that nowadays if we can.
Yeah.
We used to do it all the time, but now we built up fund balances. We try not to. So we should be able to project that chart out pretty much after the third Friday count, right? That's probably where you're really.
Yeah. Yeah, I think once we get up and running, you get a couple payrolls under your belt, you see exactly where your teaching staff is, those final late hires and all of that. We could be talking about it in October, November.
So when we talk about our fund balance, it's not like we have a whole bunch of extra cash sitting around that we don't use. We use that cash every year to maintain cash flow.
Absolutely,
really.
absolutely.
And that's what people miss out on, is there's a cash flow draw on that account. Otherwise, we have to borrow money to make payroll.
Yeah, and On that topic, one of the things that will be on our agenda for next month, historically, you would issue trans or tax revenue anticipation notes to borrow money for cash flow purposes. We've been in conversations with Waukesha State Bank to establish a line of credit. It doesn't cost us anything. I don't see us needing to use it. I wouldn't try to use it, but just as a safeguard, that'd be something the board would have to reconsider every year. But yeah, that fund balance does allow us, we used to spend significant money on interest payments when we were borrowing, just like any other governmental agencies. They probably had similar cash flow cycles. And actually on that, one thing I forgot to mention, if you go back to page 4, one thing I like about this budget adoption format is it outlines your fund balances at the very top of the page. There used to be just designated and undesignated. It was really nice and simple, and now there's 5 categories. But if you look at an item that we'll be talking about later on the agenda, the designation of additional funding for our health insurance, this shows you the breakout of our fund balances. And really, when we talk about how much fund balance we have, people generally talk about it as a percentage of expenditures. It's pretty standard. It's really the bottom 2 in the 15-16 column. It'd be the 2.2 million and the 25.5 million. Those are really the fund balances you're talking about, in my mind, for cash flow purposes, because the health insurance is restricted, and the other one is non-spendable, meaning there's an obligation tied to it that the auditors make you draft. So that's another thing I like about this format, is it lays it out exactly for you. Now, the definitions can be cumbersome, but really the big ones are the restricted right now is the health insurance, and then the unassigned is kind of our general fund balance. Fund 38, let's go back to page 16. Again, those are required debt payments. We'll be adding the actual schedules to this book so you can see the debt payments that are out there and the future obligations. You get into the Fund 40s, and there's a whole slew of those being used here. Fund 41, as I mentioned, is Glenn's maintenance budget and the recoding of those expenditures that we talked about earlier. Fund 41 is where the proceeds, you can see the $8 million proceeds in 14-15 from the energy efficiency. The money came in there, the money came out of there as we paid for the projects. This fund is idle at this point. I don't believe we have any fund balance, or very little in there. So I'll leave it in there for historical reference so you can see complete fiscal years. Fund 46 is the capital expansion fund. This is the one we created to get that 5-year clock starting. We're not budgeting anything to go in there for this year. I think if we wanted to do that, that's a conversation for spring as we get a better idea of how the fiscal year is looking. You'll notice on the bottom of this page, and as many pages as we can easily do, I put a lot of the DPI links on there, so if the public wants to dig into Fund 46 for whatever reason, the information will all be accessible to them off of the website is the goal. Fund 47, Joe, help my memory, which one? Oh, this is the turf fund, so that's a work in process still. Property sales fund's been around. We don't have anything in mind. Anything we would choose to do with those funds would be coming back to you as a budget amendment to get authorization. So they're not left blank by.
So where in our budget do we account for all these promised payments from these groups? I mean, there must be a revenue line from the sports clubs that we've been signing these agreements with, and are they keeping their agreements?
It's a work in process. My staff and I are going to be meeting Wednesday or Thursday to go over where are we with the Field of Dreams projects, I guess. So I think I'll be able to report out. I didn't want to budget a revenue line item without really understanding where are we with the collections.
And the pool agreement, of course.
Yeah.
Because,
So that one will probably be updated before we do the final budget approval in October. I just didn't know enough to even put a number in there to feel comfortable with. But it's something that we need to put a little more focus on.
I find it very frustrating to agree to these investments with not quite the follow-through from the clubs that they promised. Now, I'm hoping that we don't have that problem with Field of Dreams. I mean, it wasn't like we asked for a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll know more next month on that. Fund 50, I guess, the transition to Aramark has gone smoothly so far. I've actually asked Aramark to come to FNF in October, I think is where we have them scheduled now, just to give you a quick update on how the transition has gone, how's staffing, how's it operating, all the things, any questions you want to answer. I thought it'd be good to bring them back here. And then I'll bring them back in spring, late spring or something, just kind of a year-end or almost year-end report to let you know. It's a big operation. I think it's good for them to report out to you at least once a year. So one thing that we are looking at in food service is, right now we have fund balance set aside of $2.3 million. So we've put in here, and I put it in the budget, you'll notice that the revenue is just $4 million, basically 3.9, and the expenditures are $4.8 million. We plan to come back to this committee probably numerous times to lay out a plan to use a portion of those fund balance dollars for facility improvements in the kitchens around the district. Again, I've budgeted for them, but the projects themselves will come back to you for approval. We're hoping to bring you an initial plan around the end of the calendar year. That'll give us 2 or 3 months to kind of look at different options and what we're looking to do going forward. So this fund is purposely at a deficit position.
Mr. Como?
We were exploring potentially some other uses too of those funds, getting fresh fruits and vegetables, perhaps some gardens. I know that our new food company Aramark has some programs related to the gardening and the fresh fruits and vegetables. Have we pursued that at all, that angle at all? Not, or are we just strictly looking at facility improvements?
No, we talked about those things as well, but again, that's why I think we're coming back to you in 3 or 4 months, because they've been so busy just trying to get their legs
Sure.
underneath them.
Sure.
Because they took over summer school as well, so they've been really running with it. But I think those are all conversations where
The whole local sourcing
Yep.
thing is really positive and on a roll right now, and I think that, we could potentially take a look at some of the other projects that Aramark has worked on with local companies, and I know that was part of their presentation.
I think, Mr. Cohen, we gotta be a little bit careful, because if we expand beyond just dollars and cents and start talking about specifics, we're almost talking about a separate agenda item.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll be here all night if I pulled out every one, but I would just say we gotta be a little careful from a,
And I think that's a good question to ask in October, Joe, when they're here. I don't want to
Fair enough.
speak for them because I wouldn't do it justice, so.
Fair enough.
I do remember them in their proposal having that information, I just don't remember off the top of my head.
I have a question though. Also discussed to have some extra staff.
Yeah, and that's what Aramark's, they're, that first month, we were gonna have them come in September,
Right.
maybe 2 weeks into the school year. They wouldn't really have it all figured out yet, so.
sounds like we have to schedule a future agenda item for this, since we have a number of interesting questions from committee members here, so we'll just have to put it on the future agenda.
All right, Fund 72 is some level of scholarships, not as significant in terms of the overall scheme of things. Fund 73 is still an entity, it's not utilized. That was part of our post-retirement trust. And then Fund 80, right now, we're spending down existing fund balance in there. Hispanic Community Liaison is coded in there, and then the Strings Academy is in there. I thought it was good to give you a breakdown of sometimes stuff gets lost in the wake. So in total, all funds, total expenditures, $180 million. Total receipts, $178 million. But these numbers will change. We have a couple months yet ahead of us to finalize all this. But this gives you the general feedback. And then on the back, and one thing I'm hoping to do, or Joe and I are going to do, is provide you some more, there's a lot of historical here, tax rate, the levy, equalized value. I want to add some information in terms of comparison data with other school districts. I know in Waukesha County, we're by far the largest, but there's some comparables I think you can still get from, cost per pupil, where are we at in terms of mill rate with other Waukesha schools, information like that that's helpful. And then what Joe and I get from all this is we have a booklet 2 or 3 years from now we can refer back to and refresh our memory. And then we threw the revenue limit calculation in there for anyone who wants to dive into that. It's great colors and everything. So this is the book. I'm hoping you like the format and kind of where we're going with this. I do envision this being on the website once the new website's up and running. We'll be making that transition soon. So a lot of numbers, a lot of moving parts, so I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have or suggestions.
I appreciate the 24-year tax levy history. I think it gives a good illustration of how tax levy has changed over the years, and some of it has to do with state aid, some of it has to do with Act 10.
Yep.
Some of it has to do with various items. But we peaked in 2010 at 86 million, and in terms of all funds, and today we're 80.6, 80.7. So been very flat since 2010. Which is a good thing, because if you go up, that's obviously going to mean more public expenditures, more public tax dollars. So it's nice to be able to hold that in a nice flat line. Then the other page on 29, you have the equalization value history, which is also an important number. It shows the wealth of the district from a property value perspective. Is that more or less it?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then at the bottom of all three of these historical pages is a 3, a 5, and a 10-year average. We use those sometimes to help develop a budget assumption, even though last 10 years or so has been a lot of spikes, ups and downs, and I don't know if it's as good, but it at least gives you a point of reference.
You can sure tell the crash, 2008, when the crash hit, we were at 9.8, and we haven't gotten back yet. We're at 8.8 now, so you can see the,
Yep.
so we're still trying to come back from our 2008 crash. It's what we call the slow recovery.
Mm-hmm. So moving forward on the agenda, just to kind of, the board in a few minutes here will be talking about setting the, first approving the preliminary budget for publication, just so we can get it out in the paper, because it has to be posted 15 days before the budget hearing. But we're not locked into anything. The budget hearing will occur, and I know if you've all been through the budget process, but the board has full authority to tweak the budget up until the time of final approval at the end of October. So we're looking at a budget hearing in September, which we did last year. And then in October, just to kind of remind everyone, your October meeting, both the committee and the board, you'll approve the budget subject to modifications, because we won't have our aid number. And then the 15th, we'll get the aid number and the voucher numbers. And then on October 26th is the date we had talked about for final approval, which, if you recall, last year, it's a pretty short meeting. And then in November, we start all over again with the process. So
Just one quick question on page 30, and I know what, I kind of know what it is, but I kind of prefer a little bit more clarity.
Sure.
The energy efficiency line item, which is C, those are funds that are part of our revenue limit calculation worksheet, correct? Associated with the energy efficiency project. Can you give them, you know what I'm talking
Are you
about?
talking the 871,000?
871,138. What's that number come from?
Yeah, that's, and Joe, correct me, this is his area of specialty. That is our, there's the $8 million of bonds we have to repay. So you have a principal and interest payment that we need to levy for minus the savings in utilities. So that's that's the exemption that we'll be talking about in just a couple of minutes. So that's that number.
So I guess we will be doing that in a few minutes, but essentially that's part of your revenue limit calculation. I guess exemptions to me are part of the revenue limit calculation. They're above and beyond the old revenue limit, but you're given an exemption for a program as part of the revenue limit calculation, correct? Because
Right.
you're allowed to raise your revenue limit to cover that expenditure.
Correct. But it doesn't go into your base for the following year. That's
It
what's
doesn't
not
go into your
recurring.
base for the following year, so once we pay it all off, then it's
then it
gone
goes
and we
away.
move on.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Any additional questions from anyone? I wasn't good at recognizing committee members here, so I'll spin my head around. Was there any questions on the preliminary budget planning from anyone that we've missed so far?
Pretty good.
Okay, we'll try to make a point of bringing the food service in for a more detailed good discussion. I always think that's a worthwhile discussion, but it can go on for a while, so. Okay. Well, with that, then we can move right on to the action items, which is approval of monthly vouchers. Mr. Sikora?
Yes, we had one question regarding the July vouchers, and it concerned the parent transportation contracts. And we have 72 parent contracts at a cost of $75,338 for the 2015-16 school year. And one of the questions was approximately how much money do these contracts save the district in busing? Well, with those contracts, I mean, if we were not to have those, because our bus route pairings are so tight right now, we'd have to add at least 3 buses. And the annual cost for each bus would be $46,000. So right now, the district would be saving about $63,000 in busing costs by having these parent contracts.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for that. I know I've asked some questions on that earlier throughout the year, and it's nice to get that overall kind of perspective. You know, one, why are we doing it? And two, we're doing it for a good reason, to save money, so.
We've developed over the years a lot of efficiencies in our transportation, in our routing, and this is a reflection of that.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions for Mr. Sikora? If not, do I have a motion for approval of monthly vouchers?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Caffrey, second by Pat Madsen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Approval of 2016-17 budget for publication.
You want me to walk through all that again, or?
No, we just had a nice presentation of preliminary budget. Are there any additional questions? Do I have a motion?
I'll move for approval, as presented.
Motion from Mr. Como. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. McCaffrey. Additional discussion? Seeing no additional discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None opposed. Motion passes 5-0. Approval of a public hearing date is our third item for today. Gentlemen?
Yeah, this is a requirement as part of the budget process, and right now, we're looking at having the public hearing before the September board meeting, and the 14th at 6:30.
Do I have a motion to approve the date?
So moved.
Motion, Mr. McCaffrey. Do I have a second? Second, Mr. Anacek. Additional discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. Motion passes 5-0.
You want me to take this one? You want me to take this item?
Approval of restriction of fund balance for health claims. this might take us a little bit more time.
Yeah, this is a little different topic, but as a self-funded health insurance program, one of the things is for a board, and this board's obviously done a good job of setting aside a certain amount of funds to cover the bad years, essentially. The initial goal, I watched last year's tape, and the initial goal was 3 years. And then I know we talked, since I've been here, about stretching that out to 4 years. So I kind of took that conversation of getting to 4 months of claims data and reserves in drafting and coming up with these numbers. So right now, if you recall from the fund balance summary in that booklet, we have $5 million set aside for health claims payable. And what we're recommending now is that we add $772,252 to bring that up to $5.77 million. That gets us to 3.5 months worth of resources or funds in health claims payable. The goal again is to get there to 4 months, but I see no reason to have to get there in 1 year. I think that's something we can do over closing out this past fiscal year and then heading into this fiscal year. So that's what all of these numbers are meant to say. I did attach the district fund balance just to for your point of reference, and our health claims payable worksheet just for your review. But it really comes down to moving us to 3.5 months of reserves from 3. And that would call for the designation of $772,252.
Questions? Motion? Motion, Ms. Madden. Do I have a second of the motion?
Second.
Second, Mr. McCaffrey. Additional discussion or questions? I'll throw in a little bit of comment. I don't think 3.5 months is a hard and fast rule. I think, or even 4 as we move through this. I do think going a half a month at a time is a nice discretionary way of doing this. Obviously, we need to work our way towards. We also have to look at the fact that we have rising healthcare costs. Whether we want to blame Obamacare for it or not, I don't know, but when they're talking about 10, 15, 20% increases in cost, that's going to come out of somewhere, and it's going to eventually hit us. So we got to make sure we keep this fund up there a little bit. So
I think that's a good point. Even if, let's say 4 months is the magic period of time, that's going up 8 to 18% each year. So even if we keep that month target, the dollar is going to be moving over time on us. So.
right, and we are doing a good job through the modifications of health plans and trying to control our costs. When we went self-insured, it was a tremendous help to us. Started at just pre-Act 10, but almost every district in the state of our size has followed our lead on that once Act 10 passed. So, Mr. Como, you had a question? Okay. Any additional comments or questions? Okay, we have a motion on the table. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes, all opposed? None opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Okay, back to approval of resolution to exceed revenue limit on non-recurring basis.
Yeah, it's part of that energy. Did you want to do this one, Joe?
Sure.
Okay.
This is something you referenced earlier, Mr. O'Brien, and it's just in regards to what we had for our energy efficiency debt. And right now, the debt due in 2017 it's in the background, is $1,066,950. And we're required by statute to deduct the guaranteed energy utility savings of $194,812. That's going to be transferred from the general fund to be applied against the debt payment. So what we're looking for here is a recommendation to, on a non-recurring basis, to exceed the revenue limit for the net difference of $871,138.
I just want to add, this is a resolution that the board will be asked to approve every year that debt's out there. It's an obligation. Just so you know, it's Here, 12 months from now, we'll be having the same conversation.
And in all fairness, we can say no, and we can take it out of our general fund if we wanted to, and reduce our fund balance by that same amount. So, but every year, so far, we've said yes, but certainly the option is to take it out of our general fund and reduce our fund balance. So, any additional questions on the topic at hand? How much longer is our debt service after, on this particular project?
Well, it was 7 years, and this is the third year, so we would have 4 more.
4 more years, and the amount of energy savings that we apply to that service right now?
Well, right now, we look at our total guaranteed savings from the performance contract, and in year 2, we're applying $194,812, and overall, for all 7 periods, it would be $1,449,000.
And just so the public knows, we're undertaking other energy savings projects out of our general fund balance right now. The Lindholm Building has some work being done on it,
North boilers,
North Boiler, so we've been using a mixture of general funds and this particular funding program, so. Okay, any other questions or comments? Mr. Ronachek?
Yeah, I'm gonna vote no on this because I feel that it should have been taken out of our regular maintenance budget. I mean, we just went through this whole budget process, and we could have budgeted for these things, but we took advantage of a law that's out there and that was put into place by Governor Doyle to exceed the revenue limits without going to referendum for energy services. But not all of these things were energy efficient, but if you put them all together, yes, they are. But if you were to single them out, they weren't. And so I just feel we should have asked the taxpayers through referendum if we wanted to go above revenue limits, and we didn't. I think of it like if I gave my kids out of my wallet money for school supplies, and I said, here, this is what you need. Take this, get your supplies, your clothes, everything. And then they went to my wallet and they took extra to get something else. And yes, maybe they were sneakers, but they should have used what I gave them. And I think of it like that. And yes, the law is there, but it's also an ethical thing that we should have asked. And so I just don't know why we can't put it in this budget, all these things, and use the money that we have. We have 160 million roughly operating budget, and we could have taken it out of there.
Ms. Madden?
Well, the board chose not to do that, and they did take advantage of the law that Governor Doyle put in effect and the taxpayers put in effect. And we have 2 ways to pay it. We can pay it by this resolution, or we can pay it from the general fund.
That's
But it
right.
has to be paid.
Right.
Don't have any choice.
Oh, but we had a choice.
We
when-
had a choice.
Right.
But that's passed, so we can't talk about that now. When we want to renew our energy efficiency after the 8 million is paid, then we can talk about it again. Right now, we have an obligation that the taxpayers owe because of what we did.
Exactly,
for
and I'm
energy
hoping that they
saving.
get the point, and I hope, Lauren, that you can get the word out there exactly what happened. I didn't understand it at first, and now I do, and I've only gotten 1 email on this. Person was fuming, and I hope I get directed the email to you, Darren, but through that last article, only 1 person reached out, and I was like, I don't think people understand, but you're right. Now there's a debt, and now we have to pay it, and that's the way it is.
Well, I understand your point, and I certainly respect your no vote and your reasoning for that, Ms. Ronachek. And but I don't know when this was actually passed, whether it was Governor Doyle or Governor Walker. What I do know is that we've had pretty much uniform power within one party for some time. They could have repealed this law, and
Exactly.
they haven't made one effort to repeal it. So they must think it's a good idea at that level. I think because of all the constraints that school districts have had across the state, that statewide, they made far more aggressive use of this mechanism than we have here in Waukesha. I don't think there was anything unethical about it. I do know from past experiences on referendums, probably about the most unethical thing you can do is ask someone to vote to raise their taxes. So going to referendum for stuff like this causes tremendous community stress. And I think it's better to try and manage your budget in a way that you do the right things without causing high taxes and without asking the community for a tax increase. I think that's a more ethical situation. And we've done a great job in managing our budgets over the years through the savings on healthcare, teacher salaries, teachers' compensation, all the things that we've achieved under present superintendent versus the previous superintendent. We've been able to build a fund balance that now has us, you know, if we had spent $8 million on this to do these things, we'd have to borrow money to make payroll of $8 million this year. So that's the difference when you talk about where we take it from. So it's just not that easy to say ethically we should have done this or that. I think it's a matter of how you look at it. I don't disagree from your perspective, but I think from other people's perspective, you could look at it in a different way and say ethically, I think this is a good idea. So, yeah.
But I also think that if we didn't have the $8 million law, that we wouldn't have just gone out and spent $8 million. We would have budgeted for them a little each year. This needs to be done, this needs to be done, this needs to be done. We wouldn't have just grabbed a whole $8 million worth of projects and said, let's do this, where are we gonna put it? You know what I mean?
Well, some of the things are 30-year-old items that were well past their life.
50.
Yeah,
4 years.
yeah. So I don't know. Again, we're debating an old subject, but I understand your point about where you take it from and why you'd vote against this, and I don't have a problem with that. Any other comments as such? Okay, do we have a motion for this in a second?
Yet we haven't.
Do I have a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion. I move to approve the resolution to exceed the revenue limits in the amount of $871,138 on a non-recurring basis per Wisconsin statute 121.91, sub 4, sub O, for debt service payments included under the energy efficiency exemption.
Second.
Additional questions or comments? Still have an open floor for discussion. I mean, it is $870,000, so if there's anything else to be said. Okay, we go ahead and have the vote then. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1. Okay, that takes care of our action items. Now we go to the information items, Fund 38, debt refinancing.
Yeah, just, I guess, flip over to the backside of the executive summary, just the amortization schedules of, on the top half is our current amortization schedule, and then what we've used to cost out the interest savings is reflecting the January 20th, 2017 extra principal payment, and we're estimating $166,000 in interest savings. And you'll notice that the debt would end in March of 2019 instead of 2020.
Is it possible we could be looking at reducing this every year, depending upon our fund balance?
In a perfect world, I would love to pay it off by 18.
It's also possible we could have a settlement and be able to pay.
Don't have to watch.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Impact this very soon.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
yeah, absolutely. Then that changes everything.
depends on which side wins, which side loses, and
either
and
way.
then what the settlement is after they win and lose, because there will be an appeal, I'm sure, so.
Well, as I understand it, either way, of the provisions something positive will happen either way. It's just, it would be nicer if it happened sooner rather than later.
And that's an ongoing action which we're part of too, right? You know, we're engaged with one of the,
Right now,
the grieving part, the party making the grievance, I believe, is that correct?
with another company, but the Stiefel Nicholas.
Okay. Okay, so, and the one with the bank, the Canadian bank, that one is not scheduled right now between Stiefel and,
Still ongoing.
that's still ongoing, okay. Okay, so we don't know. Anyway, that's where we're at on that. Any additional questions on the? We talked about this last time. I still am concerned that we're only getting 0.4%. I mean, I can get American Express savings at 0.8, so I would think the school district could do better than 0.4. I mean,
We're also restricted on what we can invest in, but it's something we have had some conversations on, but on a percentage basis, that's twice as high as what I'm getting, but on a dollar basis, is it worth it at this point? That's what we need to, but we are looking at our current investment options to see what we have out there. Still pretty low.
I'll take an extra 0.4% on $25 million.
Yeah. No, I would agree.
Okay, with that, I guess we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody, tonight. Thank you for coming. We did have a guest tonight, and we're always pleased that you're here. So meeting's adjourned. Thank you.